that do normally bite only in self-defense. You're more likely to contract rabies from an unvaccinated dog or cat. Contrary to what most people think, when left alone, bats are actually quite timid and gentle. They are highly intelligent animals that researchers have even been able to train. And bats are not blind. In fact, they can probably see better than we do at dusk. Plus, they use sophisticated bat sonar and can navigate so well that they can avoid obstacles no wider than a piece of thread. Bats are amazingly diverse. With nearly 1,000 species around the world, they make up 1/4 of all mammal species. Most of these species are highly beneficial to man. Bat droppings in caves support whole ecosystems and provide valuable fertilizer and bacteria used in detoxifying waste, alternative fuels, and antibiotics. Over 70% of bats are insect eaters, providing the world's most efficient means of natural insecticide at a time when there are more and more scares about virus-spreading mosquitoes and harmful chemicals in pesticides. With its highly advanced feeding techniques, one bat can consume up to 1,000 mosquitoes an hour. Nearly 30% of bats eat fruit or nectar, playing a crucial role in pollination, seed dispersal, and hence the survival of rainforests and desert ecosystems. A small percentage of bats eat fish, frogs, birds, even bats. Of all the bat species, only one, the common vampire bat, really feeds on the blood of other mammals, and the species is only found in parts of Latin America, never in the United States. To control disease that's sometimes spread by vampire bats among cattle and other livestock, ranchers catch the bats in nets, confirm they are vampires and not other harmless bats, and then apply a poison that will spread among roost mates when the bats return to their caves to groom. Ironically, it was the deforestation of land in Latin America and the introduction of such livestock by colonists that has allowed the vampire population to grow unchecked. To feed, a vampire bat makes a small, painless cut in the skin of a sleeping animal. An anticoagulant in its saliva keeps the blood from clotting as the bat laps up about 2 tablespoons of blood from its unsuspecting prey. This anticoagulant has been synthesized and used in heart patients with fewer side effects than other medicines, proving that even the vampire bat is beneficial to man. Compared to other small mammals, bats tend to have longer lifespans. Depending on the species and circumstances, they generally live from 10 to 20 years. Occasionally, however, a bat will live 30 years or more. That's like humans living longer than 100 years. Much of this longevity is due to the fact that bats choose isolated homes where they remain during the day. It's not by accident that they do their flying and feeding at night when potential predators are sleeping. The arrival of these unique flying mammals on Earth remains a mystery. What their evolutionary ancestors looked like is unknown. Paleontologists believe it was a small, tree-dwelling, insect-eating mammal, capable of jumping from branch to branch, or perhaps even further by means of gliding, but no one knows for sure. The mystery lies in the fact that one of the oldest known bat fossils, found in the rock layers of this lakebed in Mosel, Germany, tells us only that bats were already highly evolved 50 million years ago, and not much different than they are today. So far, no fossils have been found to tell us exactly who the bat's ancestors were. Scientists can only theorize about what mutations took place to get the bat to where it is today. Unfortunately for paleontologists, bats aren't easy to study. When they die, they usually disappear. Often they are eaten by scavengers. Bats belong to the order known as Chiroptera, which means hand wing. The bones in a bat's wing are the same as those of the human arm and hand, but bat fingers are longer and connected by leathery membranes of skin. They are divided into two suborders: Megachiroptera, such as the fruit-eating bats of the tropics, which rely heavily on vision to feed, and the larger suborder Microchiroptera. Bats in this group eat mostly insects and orient themselves mainly by sound. While bats have figured prominently in the folklore of many ancient and modern cultures, surprisingly there is no record of bats from prehistoric humans, despite the fact that, like bats, they were cave dwellers. Little is known about the cohabitation of prehistoric humans and the bats that shared these dwellings. For the animals, it must have been startling to see the flicker of campfires and to glimpse the silhouettes of the humans whose fires were stealing the darkness from their caves. As for the intruders, they must have wondered at the high-pitched cries and distorted shadows of the bats who hung upside down from the cavern vaults. Given that bats were so small and easily accessible, scientists wonder if they were part of the diets of early humans. They don't know for sure, but among the relatively abundant remains of meals eaten by cave-dwelling humans, no bones of bats have ever been found. And why is it that among the multitude of animals represented on cave walls, there isn't a single outline, not so much as a sketch of a bat? Did the gifted cave painters already perceive these strange little creatures to be evil spirits or untouchable dark beings? Was this a precursor for the myths and legends to come?
Coming up, bats find first-class accommodation in this old World War II bunker when Wild Discovery returns.
The most famous legend of all time regarding bats originated in Romania, the land of Dracula. Though the myth of vampires has been around for centuries, it was not until Bram Stoker's 1897 novel that bats were first associated with the undead, who walk the earth in search of fresh blood so that they may live forever. And bats have not been able to live it down since. Though there is no record of vampire bats in Romania, to this day most Romanians do not like bats, and many are still superstitious about them. Romania still has many of the uninhabited places that attracted bats in the first place. The species that live here would starve if they didn't find ways of adapting to the cold winters. The insects they depend upon for food virtually disappear, taking shelter under the snow, in the soil, or under the bark of trees. And the only way for the bats to survive without food is to hibernate. In the depths of this cavern in Romania, the animals have come looking for a quiet place to rest. A few final bursts of energy and they slowly begin to fall asleep, since the lapse into hibernation is a gradual process. heart rates start to fall. For some species of bats, the pulse can plummet from a rate of 800 pulses per minute to a mere dozen once hibernation has fully occurred, a dramatic drop. Shivering helps to keep the bats warm. Respiration slows considerably. More than an hour sometimes passes between two breaths of a hibernating bat. At the same time, body temperature falls from 104 degrees Fahrenheit to between 32 and 46 degrees, the ambient temperature of the cavern. In the fall, bats store up energy as body fat by increasing their weight by 50 to 100%. They turn down the thermostat and conserve energy for the long winter months. The temperature of the environment is critical. Too low and the bats will freeze to death. Too high and they will starve, because the rise in their metabolic rates will burn up fat reserves. But temperature is not the only threat to hibernating bats. Caves are just one of the places that bats like to hibernate. Dark, abandoned places that humans avoid are ideal. One would think that hibernating bats would be safe in places like this. But in Europe, as in the US and other parts of the world, there's increasing interference by both sightseers and vandals, and very little government protection. Bats that awaken prematurely can expend as much as a month's worth of fat reserves and starve to death as a result of careless intrusion. This is a major cause of Europe's declining bat population. Of the 30 species that live here, all but 3 are considered endangered, rare, or vulnerable. A few studies of bat populations in Poland have all shown that their numbers are diminishing drastically. Conservationists are fighting to protect the hibernation sites that remain. Sometimes the choice of these winter accommodations is surprising. Near a small town in Poland, bats have taken up residence in the underground galleries of an extensive bunker system built by the Germans during World War II. When the Polish government announced plans to use part of the system to store radioactive waste, local groups initiated a massive international publicity campaign, and the government's plans were scrapped. Eventually, a section of the bunker was declared a reserve. Today, the bunkers house an estimated 30,000 bats from 12 different species. Scientists have even seen large numbers from species that have declined elsewhere in Europe. With the Polish winter just beginning, the colonies are still small. The animals that are already asleep are widely dispersed, either individually or in small clusters. Even here, the bats are at risk. Because of increased publicity, the site has drawn groups of unsupervised people who at times crowd the bunkers and disturb the hibernating bats. Conservationists argue that only the first steps have been taken. They insist that the site needs eco-friendly tourism with gated entrances that allow bats in and out, but control the flow of visitors. For bats, the winter sleep isn't continuous. A few animals wake up for short periods of activity, during which they drink and eat, if they can find prey within easy striking distance. Sometimes a sharp drop in ambient temperature will trigger an alarm signal in the bodies of the bats. One or more sensory systems remain sensitive at these low temperatures, and initiate the necessary heat production for arousal. In such cases, they will wake up completely and fly away in search of a more comfortable place to sleep. When bats occupy remote, deserted sites, they're not trying to live up to their scary reputation. They're simply seeking out places to rest where they will not be disturbed. Places that people avoid out of superstition. After all, the hibernating bat is rendered relatively unresponsive to threats by humans and predators, so they can't afford not to find quiet places. The damp, gloomy cellar of these ruins has become home to a small group of bats. The site is perfect for hibernation. No one comes here. And if one of the bats wakes up, these insects crawling recklessly close by will prove easy prey. Bats have specialized tendons that hold their toes in place, so they are able to hang while hibernating without expending any energy. When a bat happens to die in its sleep, the claw-locking mechanism that allows the animal to sleep upside down isn't released. When winters in Europe are especially harsh, many bats will awaken and move to warmer hibernation sites. Only a few species will courageously resist the most intense cold of winter. A continuing drop in temperature will be fatal to the weaker individuals, which die frozen in their sleep, permanently suspended in death. The others will get through this long winter in a deep, lethargic state, hanging on to a tiny glimmer of life.
Coming up, Life Upside Down begins at birth, with Mom hanging by her feet. When Wild Discovery returns.
In the warmer climate of the southern United States lives a bat that does not hibernate. Instead, the Mexican free-tailed bat migrates each fall to central Mexico for the winter months. During the summer, it makes its home here in Texas and surrounding states. Like hibernating bats, migrating bats eat their way through the summer, storing up enough body fat to sustain them for their marathon migration flight. The farmers in this area have come to appreciate the bats. One colony of free-tailed bats can eat more than 250,000 pounds of insects each night from above the surrounding farms. Expert flyers, these bats can be seen 2 miles up and can fly as fast as 60 miles per hour. But not everyone is a friend of the bats. Vandalism has been known to occur in the caves, which is especially frightening considering one vicious but well-targeted act could destroy a whole colony. The Mexican free-tailed bats form the largest and most vulnerable colonies of any mammal. The fact that there are so many bats in one place means they are truly at the mercy of the public who come here. Fortunately, more and more states are taking action to protect the bats. What makes bats so vulnerable to extinction is the fact that most females only produce one baby a year. This is the lowest reproduction rate among small mammals. Infant mortality is high, and some bats need up to 5 years to leave just 2 surviving offspring. The young that fall from the cave ceiling meet an ugly death, as they are quickly devoured by the many bugs and organisms that are part of the bat cave ecosystem. Perhaps the most important part of the free-tailed bat's summer stay in Texas is the formation of these nursery colonies, where the female bats congregate to raise their young. Here's where sheer numbers come in handy. The body heat from the bats creates an incubator-like effect, increasing the cave ceiling temperatures to levels at which the babies can survive even when their moms go off to feed. And do they feed? Each evening at the mouth of the cave is what's called an emergence. This is when all the bats leave the cave simultaneously at 25 miles an hour in search of food. Then, after eating their body weight in mosquitoes, moths, and other crop-eating pests, the bats all return at dawn to find their young. Diving toward the cave with wings spread just wide enough to steer, the bats slow to a glide and descend like a black cascade into the cave. Amazingly, each mother is able to find her own baby using positioning and the pup's distinct cries. The pup feeds several times a day, and pound for pound, a free-tailed bat produces 5 times as much milk as a Holstein cow. Though the Mexican free-tailed bat appears to be flourishing, most American bat species are not faring so well. More than 50% of the 44 species here in the U.S. are in severe decline or already listed as endangered. Among the threatened species are the various nectar-eating bats of the Southwest. This is due to careless roost disturbance and the increasing loss of their habitat. These bats have adapted very long noses and tongues, which help them to obtain nectar from different species of agave plants and giant cacti. Here in the desert, bats are the most efficient pollinators of these plants, and without large numbers of the long-nosed bats, cacti will begin to decline. This will have a domino effect on all of the other plants and animals that depend on cacti for food and shelter. The bats and the plants that rely on them for pollination are so well adapted to one another that neither would survive alone. Long-nosed bats are the most important pollinators of the saguaro cacti, which has flowers that open at night. A cross-section of the flower shows how the pollination process occurs. In this finely tuned system, the bat's face must first become covered with pollen before it can reach the nectar. As it moves from flower to flower, cross-pollination occurs. American conservationists are racing against time to save these and other important bats from extinction. For cold weather bats that have been hibernating through the winter, spring arrives and life in the caverns begins to come alive. In the depths of the cavern, something moves. The spider never stopped moving about during the winter. But the toad emerges slowly from its lethargy. The time for hibernation is over. How these animals, nearly frozen during the long winter months, manage to become fully active again in as little as 20 minutes is not fully understood. For roosting bats, this is how life upside down looks. The bats spend most of their time grouped in tight clusters. As in nursing colonies, this has the advantage of preserving heat more effectively. Bats are highly social animals that readily accept the presence of other bat species. Whether their shelter is in a building, in a cave, or under a bridge, bats devote a lot of time to grooming. During daylight hours, bats are generally asleep, but when they first return after a night of foraging, they spend as much as 30 minutes cleaning themselves. Wherever they can reach with their long pink tongues will be groomed. They even manage to clean inside their large ears, which is a good thing since a keen sense of hearing is critical to their survival. They use the sharp claw on their thumbs to keep their ears meticulously clean. While grooming, the wings are fully extended across the mouth and repeatedly smeared with an oily liquid secreted by glands in the face. This regular lubrication is necessary to keep the wings supple and maneuverable. Next comes the combing of fur to keep it clean and untangled. Bats use their hind claws as one would a comb. Generally, they comb with one foot while hanging with the other. Afterwards, the claws themselves are cleaned. Finally, the chest and abdomen are thoroughly licked. The fact that the animals within a colony are so close to each other occasionally gives rise to conflicts, but these aren't serious. Like humans, individuals that spend too much time together sometimes become irritated. Their confrontations are settled by bared teeth and threatening cries, or at worst by a bite that causes no lasting damage. To date, scientists have not witnessed the existence of any hierarchical structure between members of the same species within a given colony. As with migrating bats, hibernating bats form separate groups where pregnant females gather to deliver and care for their young. As summer begins, the females isolate themselves from the group, seeking out places where they can get a good grip with their claws. Bats give birth in a unique position. The mother is suspended hanging on with all four claws, almost like a hammock. Her head is downward. The membrane between her legs serves as a kind of net which catches the baby and prevents it from falling. If the infant slips, the umbilical cord becomes a safety rope to prevent the fall. A pretty amazing feat considering that a newborn bat pup can weigh up to a quarter of its mother's weight, which if you think about it is like a 100-pound woman giving birth to a 25-pound baby. Accidents do happen, sometimes during the first days of life. If the mother is separated from her offspring by too great a distance and she's not able to locate him, he will be left to die. Shortly after cutting the umbilical cord, the mother licks her baby thoroughly. Then she eats the placenta as soon as it is expelled. The newborn bat is nearly hairless and virtually blind and deaf. Though its hind legs are well developed, its wings are very immature. It clings to the mother and can even be carried in flight, hanging on to her abdomen if she decides to hunt. Within a few days of birth, however, young bats get used to seeing their mothers fly off to hunt, while the young are left in the care of the colony. In the caves of France, a species known as Schreiber's bat makes up the biggest reproductive colonies. Like the Mexican free-tailed bats, they group their young into nurseries so the parents can hunt freely. No matter how large the colony, when they return to feed, they almost always find their offspring. Nursing begins at birth and continues for 4 to 6 weeks, which is a long time given the bat's size. It's not uncommon to see a mother bat nursing a juvenile nearly as big as herself. This nursing period probably ensures that the young bats have adequate time to gain the size and strength they need for self-sufficiency. European bats give birth in early summer when insects and other invertebrates are most abundant. But in tropical environments, fruit-eating bats like these flying foxes can reproduce year-round since they don't have to cope with winter food shortages.
Coming up, bats don't need their eyes to find their prey in the darkness. When Wild Discovery returns.
Summertime and the living is easy. Or is it? Hot weather can bring its own set of hardships for animals. This river, which is swollen when the winter rains fall, is reduced to a few widely spaced pools in the summer heat. In this area of southern France, drought strikes hard. Animals which didn't or couldn't follow the receding water search for any humid place to gather their strength. Their survival depends on it. For all living things, a water shortage can be deadly. On this night, bats will come from all over to drink from these water sources. They must drink every day to survive. But the hardship also brings a benefit. Their prey, equally thirsty, must come to the same place. For thousands of years, human observers were mystified by the ability of bats to navigate and catch their prey in total darkness. A late 18th century Italian scientist was the first to suggest that bats could see with their ears. But it was not until 1938 that Donald R. Griffin, an undergrad at Harvard University, demonstrated that bats produce sounds above the human range of hearing. He concluded that bats use the echoes from these ultrasonic high-frequency calls to locate and identify objects. He coined the term echolocation to describe this amazing technique. For the 70% of the bat species that use echolocation, the calls are produced by vibrating membranes in the larynx and emitted via the nose or mouth, depending on the species. Bats emit pulses from a few to 200 per second. By listening to the sounds that reflect back, they can determine not only the distance and direction of their prey, but also its size and shape. Bats can hear an insect's footsteps and detect changes in air current made by a mosquito's wings. Echolocation, which is used by a few other animals, such as dolphins, functions like a mini sonar system. The principle is simple but effective. It was present in the animal world well before people came up with the idea. But only after humans invented sonar did they realize bats had been using the same tool for ages. Bat sonar is far superior to man's. A bat can distinguish echoes at only 2 to 3 millionths of a second apart, where man-made sonar distinguishes them at 12 millionths of a second apart. It's no wonder that the U.S. military spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to study bats and marine mammals. The bat's large ears were designed to be efficient collectors of sound. Its inner ear mechanisms are highly sensitive, and its brain analyzes data so fast that the bat can catch up to 2 insects per second. When a bat is hunting in open space, its call can be as intense as a smoke detector. In more closed spaces, it is more faint, closer to normal human conversation. Bats either catch insects in their mouths or use their tail membranes like a scoop. Although bats can eat and digest in flight, many use night roosts, such as the inside of a tree, to rest and digest prey. It's thought that they might even use these locations to share information about prey availability. In city centers, airborne silhouettes dart in and out of the streetlight's halo. Bats have come out to hunt. What most people don't realize is that the flight path of a bat is usually straight. When bats are seen flitting about under a streetlight, this is usually because they are hunting and are simply following the path of their prey. If the bat is catching 2 insects per second, its flight is bound to appear erratic. Bats that make calls with their mouths usually fly with their mouths open, whereas nasal emitters fly with them closed. Surprisingly, both kinds of bats can chew and vocalize simultaneously. We still have much to learn about bat reproduction. We know that for many bats, mating season begins in late autumn. Among the first signs that the season has started is the growth of the male's genital organs, which remain hidden during the rest of the year. Faithfulness is not a feature of sexual behavior among bats. There are no fixed couples. Males will mate with several females. In some species, the males gather harems of about 10 females, separating them from the rest of the colony during the reproductive period. Some of these females, however, may also turn promiscuous, leaving the group to mate with a different male and join a new harem. While mating, they will occasionally emit cries, and the female will allow her partner to give her a few amorous bites. A mating session can last up to half an hour, during which numerous couplings may occur. Such behavior is fairly common in the animal world. Less common is an intriguing aspect of bat reproduction that is unique to mammals. Mating doesn't correspond to the period during which females are fertile. The result is a reproductive pattern known to biologists as delayed ovulation. Since the female has not ovulated when insemination occurs, she must store the male sperm in her reproductive tract during the entire winter. Only in the spring will she ovulate and become pregnant. An exception among European bats is Schreiber's bat. In that species, the female does ovulate during the autumn mating period, and the fertilized embryo is stored in her body until the spring, when it begins to develop. Every evening at dusk, millions of winged predators take off for another night of hunting insects. In temperate climate zones, it's estimated that bats consume several million tons of insects each year. But though they save farmers millions of dollars, and us from even more chemicals in our food, bats continue to be voted one of the least liked animals in the world. Sadly, people are still irrationally afraid of bats, and some even persecute them without mercy. Bats are disappearing worldwide. They are now the most endangered land mammals in North America. In Europe, many bat populations are estimated to have declined by 90% or more in only 20 years. Now is the time to put aside our myths and superstitions. Bats are not emissaries of the devil or any other evil force. They are highly intelligent and gentle creatures that are vital to the ecology of our planet. Eating insects or pollinating plants, these peaceful animals deserve to finally be recognized as allies of humankind.
Weeknights